Hi, this is my EDU101 PowerPoint, Tug of War, the Philosophies of Education. The philosophies of how education should be delivered and operated have gone through extensive discourse. Through this process, a divide becomes apparent. Traditional education versus progressive education. Firstly, let's define traditional education. Freire analyzes traditional education as having vertical patterns. Traditional education is focused on the sole transmission of knowledge from the top to the bottom. Knowledge is unquestioned, as is the teacher, the institutions, and the society where schooling exists upon. Contrary, progressive education relinquishes such rigidness. Knowledge is not only transmitted, but questioned, as are the teachers, institution, and society. Philosophies have varying features, impacts, and those involved in it, and their own problems. Let's get into it. The main purpose or objective is to prepare the young for future responsibilities and for success in life, by means of acquisition of the organized bodies of information and prepared forms of skill which comprehend the material of instruction. Standards are handed down from the past. It is hierarchy and standardization that also defines the problems of traditional schooling. He further explains that how information funneled through hierarchy are beyond the reach of experience the young learners already possess. Freire expands on this by noting that information is focused on the sonority of words, not their transforming power. All of these can make a student feel disconnected from the knowledge that they receive. Meanwhile, standardization means the same education for all. Noddings questions such as unfair, noting that cohorts are usually diverse and that standard education limits students from accessing information that is relevant to themselves. Further, standardization leads to dynamic normalization. In the Week 4 lecture, Statham notes that people act, think, and be the same out of fear of being caught and punished. Past, this could be corporal punishment. Now, it could be more subtle as risking failure by not following rigid rules of how to come across a question, such as Peel essays for writing or showing your solution in math tests. Both hierarchy and standardization forces students to be always receptive even when they're disillusioned or they meet some sort of punishment. Knowledge within traditional education is noted by both Dewey and Freire as static and unquestioned. When knowledge is kept the same, in conjunction with the traditional aim of future preparation, knowledge is eventually hierarchized as well, by order of how useful it is for said future. The problem with such futures is that it will be much like the past, as knowledge is kept stationary. One can imagine a future society that is dull, highly focused on job filling and profit making rather than understanding the world and one another more thoroughly. Education becomes a preparation for roles and purpose rather than fulfillment and happiness, a problem that Noddings notes in regards to the wider system. People end up marginalizing one another as they view others with a very limited knowledge. Bishop and Smith, a tutor and a student, respectively, talk about how knowledge is viewed in Australia, that legitimizes Western thought and denigrates indigenous ones. It expresses that within their teaching of indigenous studies, there are always dimensions of attempting to overturn 13 years of institutionalization. Knowledge, when viewed as less important, is in constant struggle for self-determination. And when that knowledge is tied to someone's own being, ultimately people are forced with the same struggle and have to navigate through stereotyping, discrimination, and even violence. We now understand how traditional education restricts individual interests, yet paradoxically must be comprehended by the individual only, as knowledge is understood as only coming from the teacher. Any other sources, such as fellow students or independent experiences, are consequently invalid. This ultimately leaves the student alienated, docile, and ready for a role misaligned from their personal interest, contributing to a society that is dull and feels inevitable. This is it becomes dogma. So, what's the alternative? Progressive education. Progressive education, as Dewey notes, is a product of the discontent with traditional education. Knowledge is constantly changing and held to equal high regard. People engage with each other rather than solely narrate and listen, and society becomes ever evolving. When understood as such, it becomes easy to assume that progressive education aims to fix traditional education's problems. But what is closer to reality is that new problems will arise. Progressive education, as Dewey reiterates, has to be a philosophy that can stand for itself, not because it is sheer opposition. For the philosophy will not answer what problems it is aiming to fix, nor identify what the new problems are. Progressivism's main problem is its being of opposition can lead to the neglect of important pedagogical figures, such as the teacher and the past, that were only oppressive due to the traditional system it was in. Figures now conflated as being solely oppressive due to uncritical association. Dewey notes that new schools tend to proceed as if any form of direction and guidance by adults were an invasion of individual freedom, and as if the idea that education should be concerned with the present and future meant that acquaintance with the past has little to no role to play in education. Progressive education, when approached uncritically, can shape a society that forgets the past entirely and disorganize, leading to repetitions of events that are deemed unfavorable and can even revert back to the traditional approach it was so avidly against. When done critically, Statham notes that progressivism privileged free movement. Knowledge is free to be challenged and reworked by people that are no longer scared to challenge it. People become more curious and are willing to learn more. As a result of such free flow, Freire notes that the traditional teacher-student relationship is dismantled. The vertical pattern found in traditional education is replaced by a system in which people teach each other, mediated by the world. Student, teacher, and institution are stripped from definitions of authority and solely become people. People and knowledge are understood as diverse, and the notion of importance is dismantled, as is the hierarchy that built it. Society is understood as a world that mediates and reproduces knowledge that is constantly revolving rather than just being pushed from top to bottom. Overall, progressivism sees education as a constantly changing endeavor. To conclude, we must remember that both sides are subject to criticism. However, progressivism does respond to the shortcomings of traditional modes. What progressivism lacks is a wider conclusive outcome, as society is still largely reproduced and dictated by the traditional philosophy. Suppose time will tell. Thank you for watching. Bye.